It's a great pleasure to be here and a great honor to talk to you, and a rather scary experience because I'm not an expert in daylighting in buildings. But hopefully I can give you a bit of an insight into the role that I see for light in cities and the role they can play in helping us to change the paradigm of development, which is clearly what we need to do. And the reason that I have a trust called the Ecological Sequestration Trust is I believe the relationship between the sun, water, living things, and human beings is something we have to totally focus on in the process of transformation, and I've illustrated that here. I'm going to very briefly run through the global challenges that we're facing, which I'm sure are pretty familiar. I'm going to talk about setting up the trust, but then I'm going to talk about how we're going to create an open source modeling tool that I hope will enable you to understand the relationship between light in cities and the economics and human benefits of it. The reason I'm here is to offer this model for use in Denmark in demonstration regions, and we're planning to do the same thing overseas. I'm also going to talk about how this model can help with financing, and then I'm going to very quickly run through a little portfolio of city transformations that particularly use light as their source of change. The big issue that we don't talk about very much, we talk a lot about carbon dioxide emissions, but we don't talk about ecological footprint. And if we are going to have a resilient future, we have to reduce our ecological footprint. That's the amount of land we use to provide our energy, our water, our food, and absorb our waste by a factor of 4 by 2050, because at the moment we're living off 3, 4, 5 planets worth of resources. My thesis that I presented around the world 5 years ago now was that we have to move to the ecological age of living, in which in Europe we reduce our carbon emissions by a factor of 4 and reduce our ecological footprint by a factor of 4. So we're looking to use light, materials and resources to create a factor 4 transformation by 2050, and we have to start making that really obvious within the next 10 to 15 years, because if we don't, it's sort of going to be a little bit late to enable the world to live properly. I believe that managing the use of sunlight in cities is fundamental to that factor 4 change, and I'll give you reasons for that in a minute. Another thing I've just completed, and this news is hot off the block, is I'm a member of the UN SDSN, that's the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is advising the 2015 Sustainable Development Goal Group, the high-level panel. And we have a thematic cities group to try and make sure the Sustainable Development Goals beyond 2015 address cities. And we're working very hard at that. And the reason that we're saying cities should be focused on are the things here, because cities are concentrations of economic activity. They have an investment focus which creates jobs. We have nimble governance in cities, and Copenhagen is a wonderful example of that. They have innovation capacity. They have the opportunity to connect urban and rural systems together, which is pretty fundamental, as you'll see in a minute. We can manage the ecology and biodiversity in the cities to really enrich global biodiversity, and cities are appropriate for system-based solutions. So these arguments have been placed before the expert panel, which is meeting in 2 weeks' time, and I hope we can carry the argument that there should be a cities focus in the SDGs. I've also been a supporter of the C40 Cities group, and the reason I'm here is that Seth Schultz unfortunately couldn't be here, but in Arup we were supporting him and them, and so I just wanted to flag up that the C40 Cities group, including Copenhagen, are doing wonderful things to actually move cities forward. But the reason I left Arup to set up the trust was because this is happening too slowly. Even in Copenhagen, we need to accelerate transformational change. And I got very frustrated that this wasn't happening quickly enough. So I decided to step into the space between the public and private sector and offer world-class tools to open source world-class tools to enable transformation to accelerate. And that's why I'm here in Copenhagen, and that's why I want to just give you some ideas about what we're trying to do. I created a not-for-profit charity because I thought that stepping into that space, you've got to be a not-for-profit, but with world-class people involved. My CEO, Mike Cheris, is here. And part of our philosophy is that we need to embrace the urban-rural system as far as daylight and resources is concerned if we're going to create this sustainable future. This is literally hot off the press is where we've got to. We're hoping to support the Future Cities Catapult program in the UK, which has selected Glasgow as the demonstration pilot city, but also is supporting London, Peterborough as well, through the Technology Strategy Board with the UK government. We're very actively involved in talking to the Ministry of Housing and Rural Development in China about providing these tools for the ecological city developments in China to enable them to move forward more quickly. We're talking to a whole basket of national governments about putting money into Africa through the Cities Alliance to take these tools into demonstration regions in Africa. We're talking to the city of Surat about taking these tools there. And we're here because we have a partnership with the Danish Cultural Institute. Olaf Gerlach Hansen is here. And we're saying in Denmark, why don't you have a demonstration region in Denmark that can experiment with these tools and then help you companies in Denmark to then take that experience overseas. This open source, agent-based, urban-rural, human, ecological and economic systems model will be the only open source tool in the world that is able to model human activity, ecological activity, natural systems and economics. It'll be the first time that's ever been done. And it's only been possible because we brought together world-class modelers in cities, in agriculture, in forestry, in water, and so on, to come together to produce an open source tool that will enable this sort of modeling to be done, including the role of daylight in informing all of these different processes. The reason that I've done this is because I know, as many of you here know, that if we do what's on the left, which is to have a silo-driven approach to designing of buildings and urban developments, what happens is, as you go from the development concept through planning into design, you squeeze out the social and economic benefits. So although we know that daylight's important for human health, it gets squeezed out along the way in the execution. So what we need is an integrated design approach that recognizes the value of daylight in buildings in the economics of the community. And once we have that, we will then be able to expand the economic and social benefits through the design process, because that will be apparent to everyone involved. So here is the model, and I haven't got time this morning to explain it, but on the bottom there, and this wasn't rehearsed, this is actually me coming here from being asked yesterday evening, is that we have solar flows and natural systems as part of this model. And this is what I believe is totally fundamental. So solar flows are in the model. It's an agent-based model that includes health as part of the agent-based system. It includes within a region all of the outputs and processes of human and ecological activity. It connects to external world trade models, and it has policy interventions that public sector can use to set taxation and specifications and other things. This model is currently in development, and as it is such a complex model, the only way that you as practitioners could use it is to have what we call user interfaces or cockpits, which are like gaming interfaces, where you can focus on the bit of this model that you really want to use. So if you're an urban designer or a building designer, you could focus on that bit of the model. But other people with other interests can focus on other bits of the model, but behind that is an integrated model of the whole regional community. Where do you get the data from? Well, basically, this is a world now where data is available, and this is the first moment in human history when we can pull data from everywhere to populate models like this to enable this to be practical. And one of the most important elements of this is connection to the global climate model. The global climate model is the only holistic scientific model that we have on the planet, And we will set this up so anywhere in the world you can connect automatically to the global climate model in your region. Secondly, you'll be able to download data from the Earth observation satellites, both Landsat and Sentinel, and that enables urban developments to be very carefully looked at. And if you didn't know, the GMES program the European Union has been funding has delivered that information from Sentinel for all of those locations across Europe, which includes large areas of Denmark's urban development. And the sort of information you can download pretty much for free is urban development patterns, forest cover, agriculture, even in the imperviousness of the soils. And down at a city level, if you input the road system from navigation satellite systems, you can get this sort of resolution of land use updated every 7 days from the satellites. You can then combine that with bringing in social and economic data from the community. And our idea is to build this model in a community so the community input the social and economic data, and then the model is available for them to use to fashion their future in a collaborative way. Visualization techniques can be used, and this is TU Berlin's work in Berlin, where they're visualizing things like solar irradiation and thermal remote sensing and heat island effects and so on. So all these things can be in the model and visualized for the benefit of designers and communities. The reason that we have a partnership with the Danish Cultural Institute is because I believe that culture and art is a fundamental part of the human transformation that is required to change direction. And so we're working very closely with Olaf. We together created an organization called Culture Futures, which has been holding conferences around the world for the last 7 years on the transitions to the ecological age to involve the art and culture community. And we will be working with them on the cultural planning and the creation of these collaborative centers. We're calling the center that operates this model a regional collaboratory, and we believe this could be run by a social enterprise which sets the model up and has representations from the community and the public and private sector. And they can then verify the data, so maybe the University of Copenhagen will be involved in actually verifying the data continuously, and this will be a people's smart approach. I don't believe in smart cities which are smart because of technology. I believe smart cities will be smart because people can make smart decisions about their future, and this type of modeling approach would enable that to happen. And finally, a really, really important dimension is finance and capital, because we can't make these transformations happen unless we have access to capital. You probably know that if you go to the bottom here, the pension funds in Denmark and the rest of the world are awash with money that is almost distressed capital because they don't know what to do with it because of the destabilizing effects of land prices and share prices and carbon bubbles and all the rest of it. Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, multinational banks are desperate for good projects to invest in. So we're saying with this modeling tool that will deliver the economic benefits of changing direction in design and investment, this model will give the assurance to enable regional investment funds to be set up, which can be drawn down into good projects that deliver those economic benefits. So there can be a direct connection here between the value of daylight, of changing the design of buildings and communities, to the economic benefits, to the attraction of capital. And this is really possible. This can be done, but we need to prove it, and therefore we want to establish demonstration regions around Europe and in China and in Africa and in India to really demonstrate that this works in a very practical way. I want to finish with a few snapshots of the sorts of transformations in cities which I believe will enable us to deliver this Factor 4 transformation. This is a rather famous project in Seoul in Korea where the road was taken out and replaced with a river and a walking and cycling access. And this is an inclusion project that enables poor people on the edge of the city now to get access to jobs in the city center. And the economic benefits of this have been really profound. And of course, the mayor of Seoul who did this became the president of Korea, so it didn't sort of do him any harm, really. Investment in public transport. We know from cities around the world that investment of about 1% of GDP per year in public transport delivers sustainable, long-term, low-carbon cities. High-speed rail is another component. Why have I put this in? Because California has proposed to run its high-speed rail on renewable energy, including solar power. So solar power can even provide high-speed rail. Solar power can also help to run electric vehicles. And I believe that the world will be electric by 2050. I genuinely believe that we will have a transformation to electric transportation in that timescale, and solar energy in cities can be harnessed as part of the transport energy system. But human beings can also harness energy systems for transport, and of course we're in a city where you are probably the leading city in the world. The C40 City Network did a study of the C40 cities and discovered that cycling infrastructure is the largest investment across the whole of the world, following Copenhagen's lead at COP15. So now cycling investment in cities is one of the fastest growing areas of investment right across the world. Bringing ecology into cities, bringing biodiversity into cities powered by the sun and water management is another fundamental benefit for human health. Access to biodiversity and sunlight are both really, really important. Waste management is critical, and creating closed-loop circular economy waste management systems is another part of the equation. Upcycling waste into attractive, desirable products is also important. Harnessing sunlight on rooftops for solar energy, but also for food growing, is a really, really fundamental way of taking the value of lighting in cities into buildings. And integrating those greenhouses into the daylighting, into the buildings, is also something which Arup started to look at and play with. So there's a whole area of innovation to be had out of rooftop food production in curtain walling, daylighting, and so on. I can claim some credit for the fact that Arup have designed a building which has algae walls in Germany, because it was one of the ideas that I promoted in Arup many years ago. And there is the building now built and operating with algae systems in the walls, harnessing algae to produce energy for the building. So that's another way of harnessing light into the building. Retrofitting buildings which can use natural daylighting is obviously another very important area as well. I also helped to initiate a program of research at Chorus, which is now Tata Steel in South Wales, where they're now developing thin film photovoltaic systems, which are part of the production system for thin sheet panels for sheds. A whole range of products are now coming out of that to turn sheds into power stations. And they'll be on the market very shortly. And there is another way of harnessing the power of the sun in cities. Integrated utility systems, composting waste, making sure that no biomass goes to waste and it's used to recycle and create nutrients for city farming. And finally, of course, this is all about these young people. This is their future. And education and providing people-smart systems is the right thing for them. And of course, we have solar-powered phones, which can enable them to get the information and work with it and move forward. So that's really my sort of summary of where we're at. We are in a position now where I genuinely believe we can start producing models that will enable the economic benefits of natural lighting and daylighting in buildings to be taken forward as part of a larger regional scale development. And that should enable us to speed up and scale up the transformational change that I think a lot of us here crave. Thank you very much.